The Justice Beat is dedicated to the 1 in 3 Americans touched by incarceration. Justice Beat is where we discuss all things justice. Thank you for listening to The Justice Beat is dedicated to the
Good morning, Justice Beat audience. Thank you so much for joining us again for another episode on the Justice Beat Talk Show. Today we have with us remotely Lauren and Elyse, who are with the Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. Lauren Sobchak is the organizer for the Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. She has been working in social justice. She has been running the Pen Pal program throughout the organization within education and outreach, planning fundraisers and communications. And as an abolitionist, she works with several other organizations and coalitions for social equitable justice across the country. Elyse Max, she is the executive director of Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. She has been working in social justice movements for 20 years in Kansas City and across the state. Elyse is an abolitionist who sees the death penalty as the tip of the iceberg of a system that needs more than reform. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you guys today. And there's been a lot of strides made in this area. And so I want our listening audience to really become acclimated to some of these issues. And we're going to get started and delve right into segment one. In segment one, we're going to talk about MADP, Missourians for alternatives to the death penalty. And Elyse, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about what MADP is, how long it's been around, the program, services, and activities, and your role with MADP.
Sure, thank you. Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty has been around really since the late 80s. It was like a loose-knit coalition of faith leaders that were opposed to the death penalty. And I believe in the late 90s or the early 2000s, Sister Helen Prejean came to Missouri and did a tour and really helped us engage in fundraising and helped our board kind of solidify so we could be an organization with a paid staff that is really moving towards abolition in more of a professional way and approaching it aside from just the faith perspective, the cost perspective and the other perspectives could be included in the struggle. So I have been with the organization for about a year and a half, and I've been the executive director since October of 2019. And that is when Missouri started back up with executions. We hadn't had an execution since 2017. And so actually my first official day was the day of Russell Bucklew's execution in Missouri. So depending on what's going on politically is really where our focus is. We have a lot of different programs in some services that Lauren can talk to. Missouri right now, just kind of a larger overview of our struggle. We've had 89 executions in Missouri. Total of 22 men are on Missouri death row, and 3 of them currently have exhausted appeals. There is an execution date set. We're engaged in a clemency campaign currently for Walter Archie Barton. He is potentially an innocent man that the state of Missouri is planning to execute on May 19th. So we are working on, we have a petition. We will try to speak with the governor's council. We will bring the petition to the governor, and then we're going to keep our eye on how that execution date maybe changes based on what's going on with our public health crisis. But certainly we are definitely working very hard right now to bring attention to Walter's case. So that's one of the things we do when we have an execution date. It's full on. We focus on the clemency campaign and we focus on that individual. And I can.
So let me stop you for one moment. Give our listening audience a play-by-play in terms of what a campaign looks like when you're up against the clock like you are now. What does it take to implement this campaign effectively on behalf of an individual that's facing the execution? What does that look like?
So an effective campaign is something we would consider like in the case of Marcellus Williams. Okay. Marcellus Williams is, I believe, from St. Louis County, and he we had helped to get him a stay. This is before I was with the organization. But what's really involved in that is coalition building and outreach. It can't just be the abolition group working to end the death penalty. So in Marcellus Williams' case, the community was activated. He was falsely accused of murdering a newspaper reporter. It was a pretty high-profile case. Black man from St. Louis County. DNA evidence was never heard in his case. So what Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty's groundwork looked like was engaging a coalition. We worked with a lot of groups in St. Louis. I mentioned the NAACP, Organization for Black Struggle, and then our social media. At that time, we had Governor Greitens for just the blink of the eye that he was in office, and right. He was using social media. So we got engaged, not at the Kim Kardashian level, but maybe right at the level below her of bringing attention through celebrities, through Twitter, through Instagram, and just tweeting at Greitens until someone on his team had a meeting, had council meet with MADP, the NAACP, and other stakeholders, and they said, okay, it's not worth murdering an innocent man. We're going to let this DNA evidence move forward. Then the National Innocence Project came in. Barry Scheck came in and presented to a board before the governors. That was last August. And so we successfully got a stay of execution there. It's really up to Parson what he's going to do with that now. But just knowing that, we can't activate alone. We have to engage other people. In the Bucklew execution, we worked really closely with the National ACLU because he had some health issues that were believed to be extra torturous in the way lethal injection was being used. Okay. So that was brought to the UN, to a council for the UN with the help of the ACLU. So really working together, engaging the communities, and just having a tight-knit relationship with the attorneys is important for us so that we're kind of echoing on the advocacy side everything that they're trying to do on the legal end of things.
Okay. Now, the day that I posted the promo slides on the show, I was also doing some background research on some of the efforts across the country, and I ran across this posting on Twitter that was made by the Innocence Project regarding the Colorado lifting of executions, no longer having the death penalty in their state. Can you talk a little bit about what those efforts look like around the country? Like, are there other chapters around the country that are trying to abolish the death penalty, and what does it take to do that?
A lot of states do have chapters to abolish the death penalty. Colorado became the 22nd state. It was done through legislation. So it passed the House and the Senate, and then the governor signed the bill. So that was really exciting. Several states have abolished in practice, but not in policy. So the other thing that we see happening are studies being done. In California, there's a moratorium. So the governor used their executive power to say, we're going to stop this for now while we do some research. We need to study it. In Missouri, we kind of take steps towards small victories. What we see is we work on legislative efforts because we don't have a lot of cases in the pipeline. We haven't had a new death sentence since January of 2018. St. Louis City was not able to impanel a death-qualified jury a few months ago in a case. So we do see that Missourians' public opinion towards the death penalty is echoing national public opinion, but we're not seeing that with our legislature or our governor as much. So we believe that taking steps, for example, Missouri is one of 2 states that allows for a judge to override a deadlocked jury and impose a death sentence. No jury has imposed a death sentence in Missouri since 2013. Okay. There have been 2 death sentences. They've been imposed by judges who override a deadlocked jury. So we believe if we can stop judges from imposing death sentences through legislation, then we would stop the pipeline of new sentences. So we kind of approach it in that way. We have thought about doing a cost study. We've talked to the auditors before. It's not something that's been brought to fruition in Missouri, but there are certainly approaches that if we had more than 2 people in our organization, we could cover a lot of ground. So we do legislative efforts the way that we see that would be best for Missouri.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about your program services and activities. So, for example, you've talked a lot about what you and the staff do, but how do you engage family members and friends who may have a loved one?
Sure.
On death row. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one thing that's exciting and unique about Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty is we have a state office, but we also have chapters across the state. And not a lot of abolition groups have that chapter model. So we have a chapter in St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia, and Springfield. And through that chapter outreach, we really get to work with people that have been touched directly by the death penalty. So one example is our Springfield chapter worked closely with the family in the case of Craig Woods. Okay. And they worked with that family, provided them support, and then helped with some legislation that came out of that terrible case that happened in Springfield. There was a law that was passed last year called Haley's Law that was an improvement to the Amber Alert system, and that was the efforts of the victim, Haley Owen's father, and Jim Wood, Craig Wood, the murderer's father, coming together and trying to improve the Amber Alert system, because Jim Wood believed that if he had received an alert earlier, he would have been able to intervene and stop his son before the murder occurred. So ways that we can reach out to the victims of the crime and then the victims of the death penalty. In St. Louis, there was a woman who was married to a man on death row who was really engaged with that chapter for a while. And then we also have a impacted advisory board of community members that have been touched so that they can advise staff on, what is really going on inside. They canceled visits in Potosi for a couple months because of staffing issues. People were flying in from California to visit their loved ones and finding out that visits were canceled. So really just being a voice for people that are dealing with just the many, many messy ways you have to deal when you have a loved one that's incarcerated. It's different for death row. It's amplified a bit, but it's the same rigmarole.
Explain the differences between someone that is simply incarcerated doing a set amount of time and someone that's on death row.
Yeah, so for the guys on death row in Potosi, they are integrated into general population. But once they receive an execution date, they go into solitary confinement, and they're not able to have any more face-to-face visits, even with their counsel. So those dates are typically set 90 days before. And so that would be like a difficult challenge for someone who wanted to visit someone after a date was set. And then, for the most part, things are the same until they get that date set, and then the challenges come up.
Okay. All right, good. All right, so what is it, what are your thoughts about the death penalty in terms of not just in Missouri, but if you have some perspective nationally? Where do you think we are moving in terms of as a society on this issue?
Yeah, I kind of think of it as a tiered thing, because I think that the population of America, Missouri and America, they don't really think about the death penalty until it's really in their face. You take a public opinion poll, and Pew did one, I believe, last year that showed that now over 50% of Americans are against the death penalty. They believe that life without parole, love it or lump it, is a significant way to deal with murder, that is sufficient, and we don't need to murder people. And I think public opinion is going to continue to increase. Bryan Stevenson's movie Just Mercy came out. Most people know off the top of their head, or people that I talk to know, 1 in 9 people on death row are innocent.
Right.
Take those odds on food, on airplanes, on anything else. You can't turn around after you've murdered someone who is innocent. I think public opinion is there, and I think if people take the time to sit down, have one-on-one conversations, view documentaries, public education is huge just to start these conversations, then public opinion changes. Right. Unfortunately, the application of the death penalty is oftentimes not left up to the people. Oftentimes, even the victims of the murder, their opinions are pushed to the wayside, and the prosecutors are really trying to convince families to impose a death sentence. So I think in Missouri, we have Wesley Bell. We have a good prosecutor who's determined not to apply the death sentence. He had someone removed from death row during a resentencing by not implying a death sentence. But also the highest number of cases in Missouri is out of St. Louis City. There are 5 cases right now pending in St. Louis City that have capital tickets on them. So I think there's a difference between the people, the populace, and then the administration. We know that Trump is trying to reinstate the federal death penalty, right? And he's trying to bypass all of the rules and the comment period that come around the lethal injection process. So I think for them, it's a political line. It's, I'm tough on crime. This is how we have to deal with it. And I think that's probably the case for our governor, too. He's a former sheriff. He's from Hickory County. And I think it is a political line. I'm not, in their hearts, I don't know how they feel, but I don't know that they can really go back and forth with it because it's being used in that way. We're the only developed nation that imposes capital punishment. So I hear it more from the administration than from individuals during our public education campaigns.
I want to back up for 1 second, and then Lauren, I'll let you have the floor.
Sure.
You mentioned the public comment period, and a lot of people don't realize that with a lot of things at the federal level, there comes a public comment period, and that is so important because that's your opportunity to comment on things that are being proposed, rules and regulations.
Yes.
And can you talk a little bit about when that's coming up, or how people can get involved, or where they should go to comment on that at the federal level?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not really sure if he has opened up a comment period, or I think right now it's being litigated as to whether the Supreme Court's going to make him go back and actually do that. So right now, the states that are using lethal injection have either a 3-drug method or a 1-drug method. And in reimposing lethal injection at the federal level, Trump has said, we're just going to do what the states do. But every state does it differently. So that is not really, a medically sound way to approach how they're going to do lethal injection. So that's basically where we are. From the last I heard, it's still tied up in the courts, but we'll definitely share that when it's available for comment, probably most likely through our Facebook page.
Okay, great. Lauren, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just to follow up on kind of what national public opinion is as it relates back down to a more localized level. So from the state to even a county level, I think it's really important to recognize that across the country, we see pools of certain populations, even at the county level, where they are sequestering death sentence cases more often, more frequently, and applying a lot of different arbitrary, issues within those specific cases and counties. And so public opinion nationally might be reflecting, say, 50% of Americans don't want the death penalty. But if you really look at the fine details, we see it occurring in very specific counties. And even in Missouri, most of the time when there's death penalty cases occurring, it's only happening in specific counties.
Specific counties, okay. And are those, in Missouri, are those counties more rural? Where would, I know you said there are a lot of people in St. Louis City, but then where are the other counties?
So there's a line across Missouri called Little Dixie, and historically that also references counties that utilized racial terror lynching. And so when you overlay the two maps of racial terror lynching in Missouri and those capital cases in those specific counties, they pretty much mirror each other.
Okay, great. All right, so we have a comment from a listener that says I think her name is Valerie Engelholm. There are a lot of reasons not to have the death penalty, but the fact that there are innocent people on death row should be enough.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. Even the law and order, really the people that really want to punish the most egregious way possible, they do not want to murder innocent people. Right. That'll stop anyone in their tracks. So I agree with you, Valerie, 100%. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thank you. So, and just thinking about all of the wrongful convictions and the wonderful work of the Innocence Project. Again, this is why we have to become more sensitive to this issue, because so many people could be put to death and they're not guilty. Okay. All right. We're coming up on our first show break. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the work of Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. And then Lauren will give us a little bit more detailed and outlining ways that family members and friends can really become more actively engaged and involved with MADP, and also some of the on-the-ground work that may be necessary coming up around the May 18th or 19th that you said?
It's the 19th.
The 19th, okay. All right, so Justice Beat listening audience, stay with us. We will return in 3 minutes. Welcome back to the Justice Talk Show. Thank you for rejoining us, our listening audience. In this segment, we're going to continue our conversations with Elyse Max, Executive Director for the Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, and also Lauren Sobchak, who is the organizer for Missourians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty. In this segment, Lauren, we're going to pick up with the programs, services, and activities of MADP. You are involved in organizing, fundraising, development, the Pen Pal program. I want to hear about it all, and I'm sure our listening audience wants to know. So you have the floor.
Sure. Thank you again for having us. So as an organizer, I wear many hats. I do education and outreach. Oftentimes that looks like traveling across the state and visiting our chapters and assisting them in hosting letter writing to those on death row, or hosting film tours based on the education around the death penalty. So we've just recently showed Just Mercy here in Kansas City. We did a film tour at the beginning of the month of March, traveled all over mid-Missouri showcasing the film In the Executioner's Shadow. And it was really important that we brought the co-producer, Rick Stack, and the former executioner of the state of Virginia, Jerry Givens. They both joined us throughout that entire week. It was an incredible week filled with a lot of good response from community members in rural places throughout Missouri that needed that access to have those conversations in a safe setting about the impacts of the death penalty, but also ways that they could get involved. Other ways that we try to engage people, like Elyse mentioned, is through our chapters. So each chapter does have a monthly meeting. Due to the pandemic currently happening, a lot of our chapters are trying to move either to online or just doing email links and things like that to get involved with each other. Other ways that people have been getting involved are at the legislative level. So we utilize a tool called Fast Democracy on our website. It tracks all the legislation that we care about, whether it's legislation we support or legislation we oppose. Everything that's on our website right now are pieces of legislation that we support. So you can go on and you can subscribe to that email list, and it will give you updates about the legislation that we're following. There's several bills right now, so that's one thing people can do. Another program that I operate is called our Pen Pal program. Missourians for Alternatives to Death Penalty provides really essential communication and socializing with those inside. And a lot of different places have Pen Pal programs, but we definitely try to provide direct access for those that want to write to men on death row, and those that want to receive letters from those on the outside to do that. A lot of the time we get Pen Pal notices either through our emailing service or on social media, so those are two ways you can reach out to us. Info@madpmo.org is a great way to reach out, or on our Facebook as well. Another thing that we provide is spiritual advising for those on death row. And currently we're seeking spiritual advisors for people with pending cases. County jails do not provide spiritual advisors at all. So if you would like to be a spiritual advisor, we not only do we provide faith-based services and connect with faith leaders, if you don't have a specific religion that you follow, or you say you practice more of a spiritual following, or even a pagan following, we do have people on death row with those needs. And then we find that it's really important to provide them those services as they're navigating their lives inside prison.
How does that work? If I heard you correctly, when they're on death row and they reach a certain period where they're 90 days out, visitations are stopped. Is that correct?
So with spiritual advisors, the only people that are really allowed to visit those on death row after they're given an execution warrant are the spiritual advisor, staff of the prison, and their legal team.
Okay.
And just to clarify, they still are allowed visits. They're just behind a screen, so they're non-touch visits with their family.
Okay. Okay, good. All right, so let's touch on the faith-based piece. How does someone, or what is the criteria process for applying to be a spiritual advisor for someone? How do you screen for that, if at all?
Yeah, so we do have forms, both through our Pen Pal program and through our spiritual advisor program, that we, if you reach out to us and you want to provide those services to someone on death row, we do have you fill out specific forms outlining some boundaries and guidelines that we require to be in contract with. However, say we get a pen pal and they develop a friendship with someone inside and they no longer require our services, we don't hold them to that boundary if they choose to carry on that conversation with the person without our middle ground. So
okay. So there's two ways people can get engaged: the pen pal program and then the spiritual advisor. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then they also can join a local chapter wherever they are, whichever one's closest to them. Again, those are located in Kansas City, St. Louis, Springfield, and Columbia.
Okay. The pen pal. So let's talk about the pen pal program. I mean, how does that work? Are there any restrictions on the type of communication? Let's say I wanted to be a pen pal. Where would I start?
So first, you could reach out to myself or Elyse through info@madpmo.org. And then from there, we would provide you our pen pal application and a list of suggestions. And that suggestion list is really important for folks to read through, as it kind of outlines your initial engagement with whomever we pair you with on the inside. So we get your application, we review it, and we see your interests. We ask you things like, what are your hobbies? Do you have a favorite book or movie genre that you like? And based on the certain criteria, we then pair you with someone inside. We typically do most of our communication through email, but if you prefer letter writing or a phone call, we can also do that in order to get you set up with a pen pal. There are two methods of conversation that can occur with someone on the inside. You can write them letters.
Okay.
Or you can email them through a service called JPay, which we can enable that for a pen pal as well if they would like us to do that. Oftentimes, Elyse and I do talk to the men on Missouri's death row over the phone. And that's something inside the suggestions list that we also talk about. If someone wants to call you and you don't feel comfortable, set up those boundaries. Just like any other relationship that you develop with anyone, anywhere, you do have to, be yourself and have those boundaries in place if you need them. So we do our best to facilitate those conversations for the pen pal and the person on the inside, but we also, are always at the ready to have conversations with either the person on the inside or the pen pal. If things aren't working out, we can always set them up with someone else. It's very, it's an open book, right?
Right. Okay. JPay, that's a service that costs, does it not?
It does.
So costs on that?
Yeah, so the JPay services is an email service that most of the incarcerated across the country have access to. Right. If people are in the hole or ADSEG, they don't usually have access to their tablets and therefore no access to email outside. Mm-hmm. So the cost for JPay per stamp, they call it stamps even though it's just an email, is it costs less than it would to just be sending letters. So a lot of the guys on the inside all over the U.S. prefer that method. It's also a faster method of communication. A lot of the ones that do have still have connections with their families, they prefer that because they can receive photographs from their family members, which is really nice. Mm-hmm. And if you're sending photographs in the mail, you can only send a certain amount with nothing on the back, and they have to be a certain size, and there's a lot of restrictions with sending mail. Right. So MADP was first introduced to JPay from Lance Shockley, who's on Missouri's death row, and he reached out to us and said, do you know of this service? And we had no clue. So it was really nice to be able to provide that in addition to letter writing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I think a lot of family members and friends prefer that as well. It's a much more expedient way to communicate without all of the U.S. mail restrictions. Because I know a lot of jails and prisons have also kind of curtailed and some have even just said no more mail. They're preferring the whole JPay system. But I just wanted to make sure that our listening audience was familiar with that and understood that, who assumes the cost of that should a person communicate with someone on death row using the JPay method through the pen pal program.
So pen pals would assume the cost of that. And another thing about JPay is that you can send monies to a person inside through JPay. Mm-hmm. So that's another thing that we do list in our suggestions list. If you do get a request for money, majority of the time it's not a large amount, but it is something that if you're a new pen pal and you don't feel comfortable doing, you just tell them that. Most people inside are very used to and aware of boundaries,
right.
And rules. And it's a sad, unfortunate reality of their life inside, but that's that is what prison does, is immediately sets up rules and boundaries. So if someone that was a pen pal felt uncomfortable sending money, you just say that. But you can, anytime that I send an email to anyone inside, I get the option of sending stamps to them so that they can reply to me for free on their end. And there have been times to utilize that function if it's an emergency where I need to talk to them and I hope that they could get back to me rather quickly. I'll do that so that they don't have to feel burdened inside with like, oh, well, I really want to talk to my family member, but I only have 2 stamps left.
Okay.
So I definitely try to set that up, but it's at your own discretion.
Are your volunteers, whether it's the pen pal program or the other program, are your volunteers individuals, or do you have some strong connections with the faith-based community in terms of churches working with you as well in some of your programs? Where do you find most of your volunteering is coming from?
Most of our volunteers are faith-based organizations across Missouri, but we have plenty of people involved in MADP's efforts that are not of a religious background. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we do work with someone that is an asylee from Saudi Arabia. He is a human rights activist. Mm-hmm. He is gay, and he believes, especially coming from Saudi Arabia, where capital punishment is done in the streets, in front of large crowds.
Yeah.
He actively engages with us all the time to speak out against the death penalty as a global human rights crisis. And so early in the month when we did our tour of In the Executioner's Shadow, we also had our lobby day at the state capitol. And he was one of those individuals that joined us in this fight to end the death penalty.
Okay, great.
And student organizations too, I'll mention. Some of them are from Catholic universities. They tend to show up for vigils and things like that. But student organizations and through Amnesty and other ways too. So I think that the faith-based, especially the Catholic movement, since the Pope came out so firmly against capital punishment, has really had kind of a new breath of air to the movement. But certainly we want to engage everybody because the arguments come from all ends. So that's really important to us.
Okay. So, man, this is really good because I think it's giving some real insight into ways that people can really get involved. A lot of times when a execution comes to our awareness, it has hit the news.
Yeah.
Okay. And by that time, it's probably let's say 24 to 48 hours before the execution is to be scheduled. And I've always wondered, what has been happening before the 48-hour panic point, and how come we're just getting to a place where we're being made aware, meaning the general public, about this person who is about to lose their life. So what are your thoughts about ways to really bring these executions to the forefront of mainstream folks out here, regular folks, everyday folks, so that we're not at the nth hour, like the execution that was occurring in Alabama last month, I believe it was, trying to understand, okay, well, what can we do in 48 hours? I think it was Governor Kay Ivey. And the fallout from that has been tremendous. So how do we get this to everyday folk? What can we help do, especially the Justice Beat Talk Show, to make sure that we're getting information out so that folks can stay aware and in the loop and be more actively engaged?
So in my perspective, you know, we work with men on death row currently, and we work with populations that are aware of those men who are there right now. But we also track pending cases all over the state. And so when you see something on the news that's related to a murder or a horrific crime that has occurred, or an innocence claim, or you know or think that, you know, this doesn't add up and someone's, you know, being held inside a prison, instead of seeing that and going, well, I'm going to have bystander syndrome and do nothing, go to a local organization working on these issues and say, I want to be engaged. How can I be engaged? Or reach out to us and say, hey, I saw this on the news. Are you tracking this case? How can I be involved? Making those connections in your own mind is really essential. But if you don't have a grounding of where to begin, reach out. It's really essential to reach out and to not ignore an injustice when you see it happening.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I also, the question about what to do with the media and the point that they pay attention to executions.
Exactly.
I wish I knew the answer to. MADP is engaged from the second. I mean, we follow murder cases before they've even become first-degree murder cases, so that, you know, we can kind of track things and put a plug in the pipeline before they become at the end hour, like what happened in Alabama, which was so terrible and horrific. I just ask people, I know there are so many injustices, and I know you're watching this because you care about people that are inside and that are up against the system and face these injustices. This, to me, is dire. This is so interconnected. If we allow Missouri to execute people in our name, then certainly they're going to over-incarcerate. Certainly they're going to impose harsher sentences. We're allowing them to kill people in our name. So kind of shaving that off, that's why I say it's the tip of the iceberg. It exposes the way that the system works that is so unfair underneath. Like the whole trial system where they're not allowed to bring new evidence forward until their very last round of appeals. I mean, if you can untangle some of this stuff with the death penalty, you're going to shake free a bunch of the other injustices that lie underneath the surface. So please get involved. Come to our website. I know it's not sexy news and it's hard for the media. Like, we are the people that fight for murderers in the media's eye. And so we need to combat that, and we want to work in coalition with other groups. We're not going to be able to do this alone. We're not going to be able to do this without addressing racial disparity or the cost of incarceration or the way we incarcerate youth. All of that is we have to work together. And so instead of brushing it to the side until it's in your face and they've already committed murder in our name, I want to work earlier and I would urge people to pay attention. The petition right now for Archie Barton is on change.org. Go to our website, go to our Facebook. It's pinned to the top. We are going to print that out. We are going to deliver that in our hands to the governor's office. So, you know, I know people ask to sign petitions all of the time. Please pay attention to those, because we do bring those directly to the governor. So, you know, just little things like that, and just seeing how it's all interrelated, which is why I'm so thankful for your show, for having us on, because we're often put to the side as like, oh, this moral, ethical thing. No, we unravel the system where we're tangled up where you are.
With this issue, we have to start connecting the dots for people. A lot of times people see things in silos. That's that issue over here. That's that issue over here. But if you're going to really break down the justice system, you have to be intentional with connecting all the dots so people can see the big picture. And with that being said, we're going to take the last break of our show. Thank you, Justice Beat listening audience, for being with us in segment 2. We will return in 3 minutes to close out and recap this show. All right, welcome back, Justice Beat listening audience. We are so very glad that you have joined us today, as we have had a tremendous conversation with Elyse Max, Executive Director, and Lauren Sobchak, who is the organizer for MADP. We just have concluded our segment 1, segment 2, in which we discussed the work of MADP. And then we also looked at some of the programs, services, and activities and ways in which regular everyday people can get involved. In this last remaining 4 or 5 minutes of the show, we'd like to leave you with a recap, some salient points that Elyse and Lauren may want to leave with you, and then also contact information, website, social media platforms, and any upcoming meetings that they may be scheduling. So, ladies, you all have the floor to close out the show, and it's all yours.
Want to go first, Lauren?
Sure.
Okay.
So I would be remiss not to mention what we're all facing right now, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. Currently, just was mentioned at the federal level, they want to start releasing elder parolees, and many people inside fit that description of being in the older population, most at risk, and many people we know personally also fit into that realm. We need an effort to push that at the state level. We also have our clemency campaign going for Walter Archie Barton as well on change.org, which we will be delivering to the governor eventually. So you can sign that. You can also find all of this information at www.madpmo.org. Additionally, you can contact us by emailing info@madpmo.org. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and then also have that website.
Okay. All right. Elyse?
Yeah, and I think a point just to reiterate is about getting involved early, and kind of combating the media's blackout of information until it's too late, until it's dire. We have a sign up, we have an email list, we will send you action alerts, we will ask you to contact your representatives when needed, we will ask you to contact the governor when we're fighting for clemency, and so forth. So please sign up on our website, again, madpmo.org. MADPMO is our Facebook, our Insta, as well as our Twitter. So we are on social media in all of those ways. So please follow us. Please pay attention. We want to get you information so that you can get involved, so that we can work to stop this practice. It's 22 states have passed it. Kansas is in default repeal. They haven't had an execution in 10 years. We really think we can put a stop to the pipeline, but we need help. We invite you to invite us to your coalitions, and so that we can work together to put a stop to this practice.
Right. Okay. And anytime you need for us to put stuff on our show page, or if you want to make an appearance to start talking up issues surrounding pending executions, etc., so that we can kind of address that media blackout, we're here.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. Really quickly, we also work with 2 Missouri death row exonerees, Reggie Griffin and Joe Amron, who do speaking engagements at schools. So if your school would like to host them to talk about their experience being on Missouri's death row, they are 2 brilliant and loving and caring individuals that want to share their stories. So if there's a need there for an educational opportunity, we would love to bring them to you and have them share their stories with you. Okay,
definitely. And if they're interested in coming on the show, we'd love to have them as well. Okay?
Great, thank you.
All right, great. So, all right, we're going to stay in contact, ladies, because as you said, it's kind of like this issue is kind of like the stepchild issue of the justice reform. Not a lot of people see it, because they think it's not a sexy issue. What is a sexy issue in justice reform? I mean, really. I mean, the issues are grave, and to term them as sexy issues, I'm not real clear about why an issue needs to be sexy for somebody to address it, because it's an issue of humanity. It's just an issue of humanity, period. And so, but you guys have really done the topic justice this morning. I mean, great justice. And I'm so very, very pleased to have had you on the Justice Beat Talk Show. And I want to thank our Justice Beat listening audience for joining us today. And thank you so, so very much for at least taking the time to explore more about this issue. Again, Elyse, Lauren, thank you.
Thank you.
You guys make it a great week, and God bless.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Justice Beat. If you like what you heard and found the information useful, then support the Justice Beat radio show by spreading the word and telling a friend.